Dear reader, before we plunge headlong into the dangers that await us in the dark alleys of Shadwell, permit me to refresh your memory as to the perilous circumstances in which we last found ourselves. In the preceding chapter, you will recall Holmes and I, in concert with the stalwart Inspector Lestrade, devised an elaborate stratagem to ensnare the assassins of the Black Lotus. A false ambulance was dispatched through the fog-shrouded streets of London, purportedly conveying Major Ashworth to safety, whilst in truth it carried only a brave constable playing the part of our wounded client. The trap was sprung with violent consequence. 3 attackers descended upon the vehicle with murderous intent, only to find themselves surrounded by the forces of law and order. In the desperate struggle that followed, one of the assassins fell to my revolver, though not before he had wounded a constable with his blade. Under interrogation at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, this captured villain, weakened by his injury and fearing for his life, revealed to Holmes the location of a safe house in Shadwell, where the enigmatic Shen Wu, master of the Black Lotus operations in London, would be found destroying evidence and preparing to flee the city. Time, as always in such affairs, became our most implacable enemy. Every moment of delay afforded Shen Wu opportunity to escape, and with him would go our only link to the gentleman of high position who had commissioned these terrible crimes. Holmes, with characteristic determination, insisted we strike at once, despite the late hour and the manifest dangers of assaulting a stronghold occupied by desperate criminals. And so, dear reader, in the darkest hours before dawn, we found ourselves approaching a decrepit warehouse in one of London's most dangerous quarters, preparing to beard the dragon in his very den. But I shall let the events speak for themselves. Chapter 7. The Shadwell raid. Nightingale Court proved to be a narrow alley in one of the most disreputable sections of Shadwell, a warren of decrepit warehouses and tenements that housed the poorest of London's East End residents. The warehouse at number 17 was a 3-story brick structure that appeared, as our prisoner had indicated, to be abandoned. Its windows were dark, and there was no sign of activity within. Holmes, Lestrade, and I stood in the shadow of a nearby building, watching the warehouse while the constables took up their positions around it. It was now past 1 o'clock in the morning, and the streets were largely deserted save for the occasional drunk staggering home from a pub. "We must assume they are on alert," Holmes whispered. "They will have watchers posted, and they will be prepared for an assault. Inspector, have your men ready to force the doors on my signal. Watson and I will attempt to gain entry through the rear of the building while you attack from the front. The distraction should allow us to reach the upper floors before they can mount an organized defense." "Mr. Holmes, I must protest," Lestrade began, but Holmes cut him off. "There is no time for debate, Inspector. Shen Wu is a clever man. If we give him any opportunity to escape, he will take it. We must strike hard and fast." Lestrade reluctantly agreed, and Holmes and I made our way through the shadows to the rear of the warehouse. We found a door that was locked but not bolted, and Holmes made short work of it with his lock picks. We slipped inside, finding ourselves in what had once been a loading area, now filled with broken crates and debris. The interior of the warehouse was pitch dark and silent. Holmes produced his electric torch and played its beam briefly around the space, revealing a stairway leading upward. We climbed carefully, testing each step before putting our full weight upon it, for any sound might alert those above to our presence. We had reached the second-floor landing when all hell broke loose below. The sound of wood splintering and whistles shrilling filled the air as Lestrade and his men forced the front entrance. Shouts erupted from the floor above us, and we heard the sound of running feet. "Now, Watson," Holmes hissed, and we sprinted up the final flight of stairs. We emerged into a large room that had been converted into living quarters for the Black Lotus. Several men were there, some leaping up from their beds, others already armed and moving toward the stairs down which Lestrade's constables would soon be coming. The sight of Holmes and myself emerging from the rear stairway clearly took them by surprise. One of them shouted something in Chinese and drew a revolver. I fired first, my shot taking him in the shoulder. He fell back with a cry, his weapon clattering to the floor. The other men scattered, some fleeing toward windows, others turning to fight. What followed was a confused melee that I can barely recall in its particulars. Holmes grappled with one attacker, using his skills at Baritsu to throw the man heavily to the floor. I found myself facing two more, both armed with knives, and I was forced to use my revolver as a club, striking one across the temple while driving my boot into the knee of the other. Constables were now pouring up the stairs, their superior numbers quickly overwhelming the defenders. Within minutes, the room was secured, and the members of the Black Lotus who had not escaped through the windows were in custody. But Shen Wu was not among them. He must be on the upper floor, Holmes panted, already moving toward another stairway at the far end of the room. Watson, with me. We climbed to the third floor and found a single large room that had clearly served as Shen Wu's private quarters and office. It was better furnished than the floor below, with a proper bed, a desk covered with papers and several chests that likely contained valuables. But the room was empty and a window stood open, letting in the cold night air. Holmes rushed to the window and looked out. "There," he cried, pointing downward. "He's on the fire escape. Watson, we must follow." I looked out and saw a figure descending the metal ladder with remarkable agility. Holmes was already climbing through the window, and I followed, though with considerably less enthusiasm. The fire escape was old and rickety, swaying alarmingly under our weight, and the ground was a long way below. We descended as quickly as we dared, but Shen Wu had a head start, and by the time we reached the ground, he had disappeared into the maze of alleys that surrounded the warehouse. Holmes immediately set off in pursuit, and I followed, my lungs burning with exertion. We ran through narrow passages between buildings, vaulted over piles of refuse, and splashed through puddles of foul-smelling water. Several times we lost sight of our quarry, only to catch a glimpse of him as he rounded a corner ahead of us. Finally, we emerged onto a broader street near the docks, and there we saw him, a slight figure running toward the waterfront with desperate speed. Holmes put on a burst of speed that I could not match, and he began to close the distance. Shen Wu reached the edge of a wharf and looked back, seeing Holmes bearing down on him. For a moment, I thought he would dive into the Thames, but instead, he drew a revolver from his coat and took aim at Holmes. "Holmes, look out," I shouted, bringing up my own weapon. The two shots came almost simultaneously, Shen Wu's and mine. Holmes threw himself flat on the wharf and Shen Wu staggered, my bullet having struck him in the leg. He tried to raise his weapon again, but his strength failed him and he collapsed to the ground. By the time I reached them, Holmes was on his feet and standing over the wounded man. Shen Wu was conscious but in considerable pain, clutching his injured leg and cursing in Chinese. "Well shot, Watson," Holmes said, breathing heavily. "Though I would have preferred him unwounded, we need him able to speak." I knelt beside Shen Wu and examined his injury. "The bullet has shattered his fibula," I reported. "He needs medical attention immediately, but the wound is not life-threatening." "Then let us return him to St. Bartholomew's with his compatriot," Holmes said. "Between the two of them, I believe we shall extract the truth about who hired the Black Lotus to steal those documents and murder Major Ashworth." Lestrade and several constables arrived moments later, having followed the sounds of gunfire. Shen Wu was placed on a stretcher and carried back to the police wagon, with me walking alongside to ensure he did not lose consciousness before we could question him. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east by the time we returned to St. Bartholomew's Hospital. The previous prisoner, whose name we learned was Chen Zhao, was still under guard in his room, his condition stable. Shen Wu was taken to a different room and his wound attended to, though I insisted that he be restrained to prevent any attempt at escape or self-harm. Holmes, Lestrade, and I gathered in a small private office to discuss how best to proceed with the interrogation. We were all exhausted, our clothes torn and filthy from the night's activities, but Holmes's eyes burned with determination. "Shen Wu is the key to everything," he said, accepting a cup of strong tea from a nurse. "He can identify the gentleman in Mayfair who hired the Black Lotus. With his testimony, we can build a case against Sir Henry Ashworth that even the most skeptical jury would have to accept." "But will he talk?" Lestrade asked doubtfully. These Chinese criminals are notoriously close-mouthed. They'd rather die than betray their organization. Shen Wu is different, Holmes replied. He is a businessman first and a criminal second. His loyalty is to himself and his own survival, not to some abstract code of honor. We simply need to present him with the right incentives or the right threats. We allowed Shen Wu several hours to recover from his injury before approaching him. When we finally entered his room, we found him awake and alert, his eyes watching us with a mixture of fear and calculation. Holmes pulled up a chair beside the bed and addressed Shen Wu in Cantonese. What followed was a lengthy conversation that I could not fully follow, though I could tell from Holmes's tone that he was alternating between threats and promises. Several times, Shen Wu shook his head vehemently, clearly refusing to cooperate. But Holmes was patient and persistent, and gradually I saw the resistance beginning to crumble. Finally, after perhaps an hour of this verbal fencing, Shen Wu nodded once, a gesture of defeat. Holmes smiled in satisfaction and continued the conversation for a few more minutes before turning to Lestrade and myself. "He will cooperate," Holmes announced. "In exchange for his testimony, he asks for leniency, deportation rather than hanging. I have indicated that such an arrangement might be possible, though of course that decision lies with the courts and with you, Inspector." "What has he told you?" Lestrade demanded eagerly. "Everything we need to know," Holmes replied. "The gentleman who hired the Black Lotus is indeed Sir Henry Ashworth, Member of Parliament. Shen Wu has been working for him for nearly 6 years, carrying out various illegal activities on his behalf. The theft of the documents from Major Ashworth in 1893 was the largest and most complex operation, but there have been others: break-ins at the homes of Sir Henry's political rivals, the theft of sensitive correspondence, and at least 2 other attempts at murder that were not carried out because the targets proved too difficult to reach." "Good God," I breathed. "The man is a monster. He is a man consumed by ambition," Holmes corrected. "Shen Wu tells me that Sir Henry became obsessed with the Vermilion cipher years ago when he first learned of its existence while serving under Pemberton. He recognized its potential value, not just the financial windfall from selling it to a foreign power, but the political power it would give him. Imagine, Watson, a member of Parliament with the ability to expose or protect British intelligence agents throughout Asia at will. He could manipulate policy, influence appointments, even blackmail officials in the Foreign Office. He would be virtually untouchable. But surely someone would have noticed his activities," I objected. "Would they? Sir Henry has been very careful, very patient. He has used the Black Lotus for his dirty work, ensuring that nothing could be traced back to him directly. He paid them in gold sovereigns from his private account at Cartwright's bank, and he always met with Shen Wu in locations where they would not be observed. Even now we have no physical evidence linking him to these crimes, only Shen Wu's testimony, which may not be enough to convict him," Lestrade said grimly. "The word of a Chinese criminal against a member of Parliament. No jury would accept it, which is why we must find the Vermilion cipher itself," Holmes said. "If we can prove that Sir Henry possesses either the cipher or the key, and if we can connect it to the stolen documents, then we have him. The cipher is the physical evidence we need to corroborate Shen Wu's testimony." "Do you know where it is?" I asked. "Shen Wu tells me that Sir Henry finally located it 3 weeks ago. It was among the effects of Colonel James Hartley, who died in 1893. Hartley's widow moved to Surrey after her husband's death, and she recently passed away herself. When her estate was being settled, certain items were offered for sale, including a collection of her late husband's books and papers. Sir Henry, who had been watching for any such opportunity, purchased the entire collection. Hidden within it, disguised as an old manuscript on Chinese poetry, was the Vermilion cipher itself." "Then he has it," I exclaimed. "Holmes, we must act immediately. Indeed we must, but we face a challenge, Watson. Sir Henry keeps the cipher at his country house in Surrey, not at his London residence, and that house is well staffed with servants and protected by substantial grounds. We cannot simply march in and demand to search the premises. We need either a warrant, which would require us to reveal our evidence to a magistrate who might be sympathetic to Sir Henry, or we need some other means of gaining access to the house and locating the cipher. What about Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth? I suggested. He has the key. Surely if Sir Henry has the cipher, he will eventually need to approach Forsyth to obtain the key. We could set a watch on Forsyth and catch Sir Henry in the act. Holmes shook his head. Sir Henry knows that Forsyth would never willingly surrender the key. No, Watson, I believe his plan is more sinister. He intends to have the Black Lotus steal the key from Forsyth, or perhaps even murder him and take it from his body. With both the cipher and the key in his possession, Sir Henry would have achieved his goal. The Vermilion cipher would be his, and with it, the power to manipulate or destroy British intelligence operations throughout Asia. Then we must warn Forsyth, I said urgently. I have already sent him a telegram, Holmes replied, but I fear it may not be enough. Sir Henry is a desperate man now, Watson. He knows that we are closing in on him. He will act quickly before we can marshal the evidence against him. I would not be surprised if he has already sent men to Bath to deal with Forsyth. Lestrade had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. Mr. Holmes, if what you say is true, we are dealing with a conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of government. We need to involve the Home Office, perhaps even the Prime Minister himself. Not yet, Holmes said firmly. The moment we involve the official channels, word will reach Sir Henry. He has friends in high places, Inspector, friends who would warn him of any investigation. No, we must act on our own authority, quickly and decisively. We must go to Surrey tonight and search Sir Henry's house. If we can find the cipher and seize it as evidence, then we can bring in the authorities, but not before. That's breaking and entering, Mr. Holmes, Lestrade protested. I can't authorize such a thing. Then don't authorize it, Holmes replied coolly. Watson and I will go alone. You may remain here in London with a clear conscience. But if we are successful, Inspector, you will receive full credit for solving the case. And if we fail, well, then you can truthfully say you knew nothing of our illegal activities. Lestrade wrestled with his conscience for several moments, then sighed heavily. Very well, Mr. Holmes, but I'm going with you. If you're going to break the law in pursuit of justice, then I'd rather be there to keep you out of too much trouble. Besides, if you do find evidence, I want to see it with my own eyes before we bring charges against a sitting member of Parliament. Holmes smiled. I would not have it any other way, Inspector. Now let us make our preparations. We shall depart for Surrey at nightfall. Watson, I suggest you get some rest. We have had no sleep for more than 24 hours, and we shall need all our faculties for tonight's work. Inspector, please arrange for additional guards to be placed on Major Ashworth and on our 2 prisoners here. I would not put it past Sir Henry to attempt to silence them if he learns of their capture. The day was spent in preparation and fitful rest. I managed to sleep for a few hours, though my dreams were troubled by images of dark warehouses and desperate pursuits through fog-shrouded streets. When I awoke in the late afternoon, I found Holmes had been busy. He had obtained detailed plans of Sir Henry's country house from the County Records Office, and he had made inquiries about the household staff and their routines. The house is called Ashworth Grange, he explained, showing me a drawing. It is a substantial property with some 20 rooms, set in about 30 acres of parkland. Sir Henry employs a staff of 6, a butler, a housekeeper, 2 maids, a cook, and a groom. The groom lives in quarters above the stables, while the other servants have rooms in the house itself. Sir Henry is not currently in residence. He has remained in London for parliamentary business, but the staff maintain the house in his absence. How do we gain entry? I asked. Through a window on the ground floor here, Holmes indicated a point on the plan. It is a library window that is poorly secured. I learned this from the groom's nephew, who works at a pub in the village and whom I encountered this afternoon. Once inside, we must search for the cipher. Shen Wu tells me that Sir Henry would keep it somewhere secure but accessible, probably in his private study on the 1st floor. We must be quick and silent, Watson. If we are discovered by the servants, our entire plan collapses. At 6 o'clock, Lestrade joined us at Baker Street, and the three of us departed in a hired carriage for the journey to Surrey. It was a drive of some 2 hours, and we arrived at the village near Ashworth Grange just as full darkness was falling. We left the carriage at a small inn, with instructions to the driver to wait for our return, and proceeded on foot across the fields towards Sir Henry's estate. The house loomed before us in the darkness, a square Georgian structure with tall windows that glowed warmly with lamplight. We approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows of the trees that bordered the property. As we drew closer, we could see figures moving within the house, the servants going about their evening duties. "We must wait until the household retires," Holmes whispered. "The servants will likely go to bed by 10 o'clock. We shall enter at 11, when all should be quiet." We settled ourselves in a small copse of trees where we could observe the house while remaining hidden. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. One by one, the lights in the windows were extinguished, until only a single lamp remained burning in what appeared to be the entrance hall. At precisely 11 o'clock, Holmes rose. "Now," he whispered, "follow me and make no sound." We crept across the lawn toward the house, moving from shadow to shadow. The library window that Holmes had identified was indeed poorly secured, and he had it open within moments. We climbed through one by one and found ourselves in a large room lined with bookshelves and furnished with comfortable reading chairs. Holmes produced his electric torch and played its beam briefly around the room, then led us to the door. We emerged into a corridor and made our way to the staircase, climbing silently to the first floor. At the top of the stairs, Holmes paused, consulting his mental map of the house, then pointed down a corridor to the right. Sir Henry's study was the third door along the corridor. Holmes tried the handle and found it locked, but once again his lock picks made short work of the obstacle. We slipped inside and closed the door behind us. The study was a masculine room, furnished with a large desk, leather chairs, and walls covered with hunting trophies and framed photographs. Holmes immediately went to the desk and began searching through its drawers, while Lestrade and I examined the bookshelves and cabinets that lined the walls. Here, Holmes whispered urgently after several minutes, "Watson, Lestrade, come and see this." We gathered around the desk, where Holmes had opened a locked drawer and removed its contents. Among them was a leather-bound volume that appeared to be very old, its pages yellowed with age. Holmes opened it carefully, and I saw that it was covered with dense columns of symbols, not Chinese characters, not Sanskrit, but something else entirely, a complex code that meant nothing to me. "The vermilion cipher," Holmes breathed. "This is it, Watson. This is what Sir Henry has been seeking all these years." "But without the key, it's meaningless," Lestrade observed. "Precisely. Which is why Sir Henry will be making a move to obtain the key very soon if he has not already done so. We must—" Holmes broke off suddenly, his head turning toward the door. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I listened intently and heard it, the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside, moving toward the study. Holmes quickly closed the cipher and thrust it inside his coat, then extinguished his torch. We stood in darkness, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps stopped outside the door. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a key turning in a lock. The door swung open and a figure entered carrying a candle. In the flickering light, I recognized Sir Henry Ashworth. He was not alone. Behind him came 2 other men, both large and rough-looking, clearly hired muscle of some sort. Sir Henry walked to his desk, apparently intending to retrieve something from the locked drawer, and it was only when he found the drawer already open that he realized something was amiss. "Who's there?" he demanded, setting down his candle and reaching into his coat. "Show yourself." Holmes stepped forward into the light. "Good evening, Sir Henry. I believe you were expecting someone else." Sir Henry's face went white, then red with fury. "Holmes, what are you doing in my house? This is breaking and entering. I'll have you arrested." "I think not," Holmes replied calmly. "You see, I have here something that belongs to Her Majesty's government, not to you. The vermilion cipher was stolen from its rightful custodian, and I am now returning it to proper authority." He patted his coat where the cipher was concealed. "You have no proof that I stole anything," Sir Henry snarled. "You're the one who's broken into my home and taken my property." "Your property?" How interesting that you claim ownership of a document that officially does not exist. But let us not bandy words, Sir Henry. I know everything. I know that you hired the Black Lotus to steal documents from your brother in 1893. I know that you used those documents to locate the Vermilion cipher. I know that you have been planning to steal the key from Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth, and I know that you have hired assassins to murder your own brother to prevent him from revealing what he might have learned. Lies, Sir Henry shouted. All lies. You have no evidence. On the contrary, I have the testimony of Shen Wu, the man who carried out your dirty work. He is currently under arrest and has given a full confession. Your schemes have come to an end, Sir Henry. The game is up. For a moment, Sir Henry seemed to deflate, the fight going out of him. Then his hand moved with sudden speed, drawing a revolver from his coat. If I cannot have the cipher, then no one shall. Give it to me, Holmes, or I will shoot you where you stand. I think not, a new voice said from the doorway. We all turned to see Major Geoffrey Ashworth standing there, his wounded arm in a sling but a revolver in his good hand, pointed steadily at his brother. Geoffrey, Sir Henry gasped. What are you doing here? Stopping you from committing yet another crime, Geoffrey replied, his voice heavy with sadness and anger. Mr. Holmes sent me a telegram this afternoon warning me of what you had done. I could not believe it at first. My own brother, responsible for my disgrace, for the attempts on my life. But I knew Mr. Holmes would not make such accusations without proof. So I came here to see for myself, to hear the truth from your own lips, and now I have heard it. Geoffrey, you don't understand, Sir Henry said desperately. I did it for us, for our family. With the power the cipher would give me, I could restore our fortunes, achieve the position our father always dreamed of. You were meant to be an unfortunate casualty, but your sacrifice would not have been in vain. You destroyed my life, Geoffrey shouted, his hand trembling with emotion. You let me be cashiered, disgraced, cast out from the only life I knew. And for what? For your own ambition, for your insane quest for power. Put down the gun, Sir Henry, Holmes said quietly. It is over. Come with us peacefully, and perhaps the courts will show mercy. Resist, and you will only make things worse for yourself. For a long moment, Sir Henry stood frozen, his revolver still pointed at Holmes. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the desperate search for some way out of the trap that had closed around him. Then, with a sudden movement, he turned the gun toward his brother. If I cannot escape, then neither shall you, he cried, his finger tightening on the trigger. 3 shots rang out simultaneously, Geoffrey's, mine and Lestrade's. Sir Henry staggered backward, the revolver falling from his hand. He clutched at his chest, where 3 dark stains were spreading across his white shirt, then collapsed to the floor. I rushed to his side and examined him, but it was immediately clear that nothing could be done. The wounds were mortal, and he had only moments of life remaining. His eyes found mine, and he tried to speak, but only blood came from his lips. Then his eyes glazed, and he was gone. Geoffrey Ashworth stood staring down at his brother's body, the revolver hanging loosely from his hand. I killed him, he whispered. I killed my own brother. We all fired, Major, Lestrade said gently. Any one of our shots might have been the fatal one, and you were acting in defense of Mr. Holmes and in the performance of your duty. You are not a murderer. You are a soldier who has faced a terrible choice and made the right decision. Geoffrey looked at the inspector with haunted eyes, then slowly nodded. Holmes placed a hand on his shoulder in a rare gesture of sympathy, and I saw that even my friend, usually so cold and analytical, was moved by the tragedy of what had just occurred. The 2 ruffians who had accompanied Sir Henry had fled at the first sign of trouble, and we made no effort to pursue them. Instead, we summoned the local police and spent the remainder of the night providing statements and explanations. The servants of the household were bewildered and frightened, and it fell to me to explain, in general terms, what had occurred. By dawn, the immediate aftermath was dealt with. Sir Henry's body was removed by the local undertaker, pending an inquest. The Vermilion cipher was secured in Lestrade's custody to be returned to the proper authorities in London. And Major Geoffrey Ashworth, vindicated at last but at terrible cost, was taken to a local inn to rest and recover from the shock of the evening's events. As Holmes, Lestrade, and I rode back to London in the grey morning light, none of us felt any sense of triumph. We had solved the case, recovered the cipher, and prevented it from falling into the wrong hands. But the price had been high: the death of Sir Henry, the destruction of a family, and the terrible knowledge that ambition and greed could drive a man to betray even his own flesh and blood. "A sad business," Lestrade said at last, breaking the long silence. "Indeed," Holmes agreed, "but a necessary one. Had Sir Henry succeeded in obtaining the key from Forsyth, had he assembled the complete Vermilion cipher, the damage to British intelligence would have been incalculable. Hundreds of agents would have been exposed, operations compromised, lives lost. We had no choice but to act as we did." "What will happen now?" I asked. "The cipher and the key will be secured separately once more," Holmes replied. "New custodians will be appointed, new precautions taken. As for the Black Lotus, I expect that Shen Wu's testimony will lead to the arrest of many of its members here in London. The organization will be disrupted, though not destroyed. Such societies have deep roots and remarkable resilience, but at least for a time their operations will be curtailed. And Major Ashworth, he will be fully exonerated, his honor restored. The truth about the theft of the documents will be made known to the military authorities, though the full details regarding the Vermilion cipher will remain classified. Geoffrey Ashworth will be able to hold his head high once more, though I fear the manner of his vindication will haunt him for the rest of his days." We reached London as the city was awakening to a new day. Holmes and I parted from Lestrade at Scotland Yard, where he would begin the process of officially closing the case, and returned to Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with breakfast and expressions of relief that we had returned safely from our mysterious nocturnal expedition. As we sat in our familiar sitting room, eating our first meal in what seemed like days, I reflected on the extraordinary events of the past week. We had been drawn into a web of conspiracy that reached from the docks of Limehouse to the halls of Westminster, from the plains of India to the drawing rooms of Surrey. We had faced assassins, broken into houses, engaged in gun battles, and ultimately witnessed the death of a man driven to destruction by his own unbridled ambition. "Holmes," I said at last, "do you think Sir Henry truly believed he was acting for the good of his family?" Holmes considered the question carefully before responding. "I think he believed it at first, yes, but somewhere along the way, Watson, his purpose became corrupted. The pursuit of power for a noble end became the pursuit of power for its own sake. He convinced himself that the sacrifice of his brother's honor, the risk to British intelligence, even the possibility of selling secrets to hostile powers, all of it was justified by the position he would achieve. It is a common failing of ambitious men, this ability to rationalize any action, no matter how monstrous, in service of what they perceive as a higher purpose. A cautionary tale, I observed, indeed, and one that bears remembering. The Vermilion cipher was created to protect British interests, but in the wrong hands, it would have become a tool of oppression and betrayal. Information is power, Watson, and power corrupts, unless checked by conscience and accountability. Sir Henry had neither. We finished our breakfast in contemplative silence, then Holmes retired to his bedroom to rest. I remained in the sitting room making notes on the case for my records. As I wrote, I found myself thinking about Major Geoffrey Ashworth, a man whose life had been destroyed by forces beyond his control, who had endured 2 years of disgrace with dignity, and who had finally achieved vindication only to discover that his own brother was responsible for his suffering. I hoped that he would find peace in time, though I feared the scars would never fully heal. Dear readers, what a tangled web of deceit and conspiracy we have uncovered. The affair of the Vermilion cipher has revealed the depths to which ambition can drive a man, and the terrible consequences when family loyalty is corrupted by greed and hunger for power. But wait, though Sir Henry Ashworth lies dead and the Vermilion cipher has been recovered, is the matter truly concluded? Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth still possesses the key, and there are questions yet unanswered. What became of Lei Chen, the mysterious silk merchant who infiltrated Major Ashworth's quarters in Bengal? Is the Black Lotus truly defeated, or do they yet pose a threat? And what secrets might the Vermilion cipher itself contain, secrets that even Sherlock Holmes has not yet discovered? And thus, dear listener, concluded one of the most harrowing nights in my long association with Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The raid upon the Shadwell warehouse had yielded both triumph and tragedy. Shen Wu was in custody. The Black Lotus had been dealt a severe blow, yet the full extent of Sir Henry Ashworth's treachery was only beginning to reveal itself. But I must warn you that what has transpired thus far is merely the opening movement of a far more intricate symphony of conspiracy and danger. The Vermilion cipher has been recovered, yes, but at what cost? And can we truly be certain that all the threads of this diabolical web have been uncovered? As dawn broke over London that fateful morning, neither Holmes nor I could have anticipated the shocking revelations that awaited us in the days to come. The affair was far from concluded, and the darkest secrets were yet to be exposed. What becomes of Major Ashworth, now vindicated yet haunted by the knowledge of his brother's betrayal? What sinister purposes did Sir Henry intend for the Vermilion cipher, and are there others who shared his treasonous ambitions? And might the Black Lotus, wounded but not destroyed, seek terrible vengeance for their fallen comrades? These questions and more shall be answered as our narrative continues. Before you proceed to Chapter 8, I would be most grateful if you would take but a moment to indicate your appreciation of this tale by offering your approval, what the modern parlance terms a like, and by subscribing to this humble channel so that you might be immediately notified when further adventures are published. Do not neglect to ring that bell of notification, lest you miss the continuation of this most extraordinary affair. And now, without further delay, let us press onward into Chapter 8, where the true depth of this conspiracy shall finally be laid bare.